Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we step into a city that hums even when it tries to hold its breath, where tall buildings glow softly behind shaded windows and the streets never quite surrender to sleep. You find yourself standing on a Manhattan sidewalk as evening settles in the air, holding that faint mix of coal smoke, ocean salt, and something metallic from the rails beneath your feet. It feels alive, but also careful, like the whole place is trying not to draw too much attention to itself. And just so you know, if you were really here in the 1940s, navigating wartime New York with its crowd shortages and constant uncertainty, you probably would not survive this without a good deal of patience and a very sturdy pair of shoes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you feel like it's share where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. It is always comforting to know who else is awake. Now dim the lights, you remain where you are for a moment longer, letting your eyes adjust to the strange half-dark that has settled over the city. It's not true darkness. New York does not allow that. Instead, it is a softened version of brightness. Windows are dimmed, streetlights are hooded, even the grand outlines of skyscrapers feel slightly muted, as if someone has gently turned down the volume of light itself. This is wartime precaution. A widely accepted historical detail is that cities along the American coastline practiced blackout measures during the Second World War, designed to make them less visible to potential enemy submarines or aircraft. It is a precaution that feels both distant and immediate. The war is happening far away across the Atlantic, yet here you are adjusting your life around its shadow. You begin to walk. The pavement beneath your shoes is still warm from the day, though the air has cooled. A taxi glides past with its headlights dimmed, casting a soft glow rather than a confident beam. Somewhere above you, a window opens briefly and a voice calls out before retreating again into the apartment's interior. It's a small sound, but in this softened cityscape it carries farther than you expect. You notice how people move differently here at dusk. There is less rushing now, though not quite calm. It is something in between. Men in work jackets loosen their collars as they head home. Women carry shopping bags with a careful sense of calculation, each item chosen with rationing in mind. A pair of sailors passes by their uniforms crisp even in the dim light, their laughter just a little too loud, as if to push back against something unspoken. It is easy to imagine that New York never sleeps. That idea will become famous in later decades, but even now you can feel its truth forming. The city does not shut down. It shifts, adapts, continues. You pass a row of storefronts, their displays arranged with a kind of determined optimism. There are fewer goods than there might have been in earlier years. Sugar, coffee, rubber, gasoline, all are rationed to some degree. Yet the shopkeepers still arrange what they have with care. A dress in the window, a stack of canned goods, a small sign reminding customers of their ration coupons. A curious little detail from this time is that some shops would display empty boxes or cleverly staged arrangements to give the impression of abundance, even when supplies were limited. It is not exactly deception, more like reassurance, a visual promise that life is still functioning. You slow your pace as you approach an intersection. A police officer stands on the corner directing the steady flow of traffic with measured gestures. There is a rhythm to it, a choreography that keeps everything moving without chaos. The officer's face is calm, almost practiced in its neutrality, though you wonder what he thinks when he reads the same headlines as everyone else. Historians still argue whether these wartime precautions in cities like New York were truly necessary on such a scale, or whether they served as much to maintain morale and a sense of participation in the war effort as to prevent actual attacks. Standing here, you can feel both possibilities. The measures are real, the fear is real, but so is the determination to carry on. A distant sound reaches you. Not quite a siren, not quite a horn. Something in between. You pause for a moment listening. Others do the same. It fades quickly, leaving behind a brief ripple of awareness that passes through the street and then settles again. You continue walking, drawn toward the brighter part of the avenue ahead. The buildings here rise higher, their upper floors disappearing into a sky that is not fully dark, but not fully lit either. There is a faint glow above the city, a reflection of all the life still happening within it. You catch the scent of food from a nearby diner, something warm and simple. Coffee maybe. Fried onions, bread. It drifts out through the door each time it opens, inviting in a quiet, unspoken way. Inside you can see people sitting close together at the counter, their conversations low and steady. For a moment the war feels distant again, reduced to headlines and letters rather than something immediate. You consider stepping inside, but instead you keep moving. There is a sense that the night has more to show you. A group of children passes you on the sidewalk, their energy not yet dimmed by the hour. One of them carries a small bundle of scrap metal, proudly explaining something to the others. Scrap drives have become a common part of life. Even the youngest members of the city are drawn into the effort, collecting bits and pieces that might somehow contribute to something larger. You watch them go, their voices fading into the layered sound of the street. It is a reminder that life continues in all its ordinary forms, even when overshadowed by something as vast as war. You reach the edge of a park and pause again. The trees here stand in quiet contrast to the surrounding buildings, their leaves moving gently in the evening air. The benches are occupied by a few scattered figures. A man reading a newspaper under a dim lamp. A couple sitting close together speaking in low tones. Someone alone simply watching the world pass by. You take a seat for a moment. The wood is cool beneath you. The sounds of the city soften slightly at this distance. Not gone, just layered differently. You can still hear the traffic, the distant voices, the occasional rumble of something heavy moving far below the surface. But here it feels manageable, contained. You look back toward the skyline. Even in this dim state, it is impressive. The outlines of buildings rise with quiet confidence, their shapes familiar to anyone who has seen images of this city. They stand as a kind of promise that whatever is happening elsewhere in the world, this place endures. You sit there a little longer, letting the atmosphere settle around you. The mix of caution and normalcy, the awareness of war and the persistence of everyday life. It is not one or the other. It is both existing at the same time. Eventually you stand again. The night is not over. In fact, it is only beginning to unfold in its own particular way. The streets ahead are waiting, filled with stories that move at a slower pace now, but no less alive. And as you step back onto the sidewalk, blending once more into the quiet current of people and light, you carry with you the sense that this city, even under constraint, even under shadow, refuses to fully dim. It simply learns how to glow differently. You leave the park behind and follow the quiet pull of the street toward a row of buildings that seem almost identical at first glance. Brick facades rise in steady lines, their windows stacked one above another, each holding its own small world. A narrow entrance sits between two shops and you step inside, drawn by the soft glow of light spilling down the stairwell. The air changes immediately. Outside the city, smells of pavement smoke and distance. Inside it becomes something warmer and more personal. Cooking oil, damp wall soap, and something faintly sweet perhaps from yesterday's baking. The hallway is narrow, the walls scuffed from years of passing shoulders, and of course and carried bundles. You can hear voices already layered from different floors, drifting down through the building like overlapping conversations in a dream. You climb the stairs slowly. Each step creaks just enough to announce your presence, though no one seems surprised by it. This is a place where movement is constant. People come and go at all hours. Doors open, close open again. Life here is shared whether anyone intends it or not. A broadly recognised historical reality is that many New Yorkers in the 1940s lived in tenement housing, especially working-class families and immigrants. These buildings were often crowded with multiple people sharing small apartments and facilities. It is not uncomfortable in the dramatic sense, it is simply close. Everything is closer than you might be used to. You reach a landing and pause. A door nearby stands slightly ajar, and through the narrow opening you catch a glimpse of a kitchen. A woman stands at the stove, her hair pinned back, her movements efficient and practiced. A pot simmers quietly, releasing a steady rhythm of soft bubbling. A child sits at the table, still half asleep, his head resting in one hand, while the other loosely holds a spoon. You do not enter, but the scene feels familiar enough that you can almost imagine yourself inside it. Morning is approaching, not in the bright, immediate way of open countryside, but gradually filtered through layers of brick and glass. A faint grey light begins to press against the windows, softening the shadows in the hallway. Somewhere above, a radio clicks on its signal, slightly uneven as it settles into a broadcast. A voice emerges, calm and measured, delivering news that will shape the day before it has fully begun. You continue upward. On the next floor, a door opens suddenly and a man steps out, adjusting his jacket as he does. He pauses when he sees you, nods politely, and continues down the stairs with quiet urgency. There is no wasted movement. The day has already started for him. Inside another apartment, you hear the distinct sound of water being poured into a basin, followed by the quick splash of washing. Bathrooms are often shared in buildings like this, so routines are carefully timed. You imagine the subtle negotiations that happen each morning. Who goes first? Who waits? Who hurries? A small but curious detail from this era is that some families developed intricate systems for managing shared spaces, including informal schedules and quiet agreements that were rarely written down but widely understood. It is a kind of cooperation born from necessity rather than choice. You reach the top of the stairs and step onto a narrow hallway that feels slightly brighter than the rest. A window at the far end lets in the early light, casting a pale rectangle across the worn floorboards. Dust moves slowly in the beam, visible only when you pause long enough to notice it. A door opens behind you and a woman steps out carrying a basket of laundry. She moves with steady determination, her expression focused but not tense. This is simply part of the day. She passes you with a brief glance, then continues toward the stairs, balancing the basket against her hip. You lean lightly against the wall for a moment, listening. The building is fully awake now. Footsteps above and below, voices rising and falling, the clink of dishes, the scrape of chairs, a baby crying briefly before being soothed. Each sound is small on its own, but together they create a kind of rhythm that feels almost musical in its repetition. You move back down the stairs, following the flow of people, beginning their day. The man you saw earlier is already gone. In his place, another figure appears. This time a young woman in a neatly pressed blouse, adjusting her gloves as she descends. She pauses halfway down to check something in her bag, then continues with a quick, practiced pace. Historians still debate whether life in these crowded tenements fostered a stronger sense of community, or whether the lack of privacy created ongoing tension beneath the surface. As you move through the building, it feels like both might be true. There is evidence of shared life everywhere, but also the quiet desire for a little more space, a little more quiet, a little more control. At the bottom of the stairs, you step back into the street. The city has shifted again. Morning has arrived, though the sun itself is still hidden behind buildings. The light is clearer now, revealing details that were softened in the night. Storefronts look more practical, faces more focused. The softness of evening has given way to something sharper, more purposeful. A pushcart vendor is already setting up nearby, arranging produce. With careful attention, each item is placed to look as appealing as possible, even if the selection is limited. A woman approaches, examining the vegetables with a thoughtful expression, weighing her choices in a way that feels almost strategic. Rationing influences everything, even these small decisions. You walk a little further, noticing how the sidewalks begin to fill. Not crowded yet, but steadily growing. People move with intention now. There is less wandering, more direction. Each person seems to carry an invisible list of tasks that must be completed before the day can feel settled. A delivery truck rumbles past its back doors, slightly open, to reveal crates stacked in careful rows. The driver leans out briefly to check his path, then disappears again into the motion of the street. The sound lingers even after the truck has moved on, blending with the growing hum of the city. You pass a small bakery, its door propped open to release the warm scent of fresh bread. It drifts out onto the sidewalk, momentarily overpowering the sharper smells of the street. For a moment, everything feels simpler, grounded in something immediate and comforting. Inside, a baker moves quickly behind the counter, arranging loaves with practiced ease. There is no excess here, no abundance spilling over. But there is enough to keep the rhythm of daily life intact. You continue walking, letting the morning carry you forward. The memory of the dim skyline from earlier lingers in your mind, a quiet contrast to the clarity of the present moment. The city may soften itself at night, but in the morning it reveals everything again. The effort, the strain, the resilience. You take a breath, filling your lungs with the layered air of the street. It is not pure, not gentle, not particularly quiet, but it is alive. And as you move with the others now, no longer just observing but becoming part of the steady current, you begin to understand something subtle about this place. It does not pause for the war. It absorbs, it adjusts and keeps moving, step by step, floor by floor, morning after morning. You follow the current of people toward a familiar pool beneath the street, where iron railings and tiled stairways lead you down into the city's hidden arteries. The entrance to the subway stands open, its edges worn smooth by countless hands and hurried steps. A faint gust of warm air rises from below, carrying with it the scent of metal oil and something older, something that has settled into these tunnels over decades. You descend. The sounds shift as you move downward. The open noise of the street narrows into something more contained. Footsteps echo against tile. Voices bounce and overlap. Somewhere deeper a train roars past, its movement felt as much as heard, a low vibration that travels through the walls and into your chest. A commonly accepted historical point is that New York's subway system in the 1940s was already one of the largest and busiest in the world, moving millions of passengers each day through a vast network beneath the city. Standing here, you do not need statistics to understand that. You can feel it in the constant motion, the steady stream of people flowing past you with practiced familiarity. At the bottom of the stairs, you step onto the platform. It is crowded, but not chaotic. People stand close together, leaving just enough space to maintain a sense of personal boundary, even if that boundary is mostly imagined. Coats brush against coats, bags press lightly into sides. No one seems surprised by it. This is simply how things are. You find a place near one of the tiled pillars and pause watching. A man in a dark overcoat unfolds a newspaper, with careful precision angling it just enough to read without bumping into the woman beside him. She adjusts her hat, then glances at the clock mounted high on the wall, its hands moving with quiet authority. Time matters here in a different way, not measured in hours alone, but in arrivals and departures. A train approaches. You hear it before you see it. The distant rumble grows quickly, accompanied by a rush of wind that moves through the station like a sudden breath. People shift slightly, preparing. Not pushing, not rushing, just aligning themselves with the expected motion. The train enters the station with a metallic sigh, its doors sliding open to reveal an interior already filled with passengers. For a moment, there is a delicate exchange. Those inside step out. Those outside step in. It happens with surprising efficiency, as if guided by an unspoken agreement. You move forward with the others. Inside, the air is warmer. The car smells faintly of wool coats, leather, and something electrical. You find a place to stand, one hand resting lightly on a metal pole, polished smooth by years of use. Around you, faces settle into their own quiet routines. Some read, some stare ahead. Some close their eyes, briefly stealing a moment of rest before the day fully claims them. A small curious detail from this period is that subway advertisements often included wartime messages alongside commercial ones encouraging passengers to conserve resources or support the war effort. You notice one now posted above the seats. Its colours are slightly faded, but the message is clear. Do your part. Save what you can. Every small action matters. The train begins to move. At first, it is a gentle pull, then a steady acceleration that presses you slightly backward. The lights flicker once, then stabilise. The windows show only darkness, now broken occasionally by the brief flash of passing signals or the tiled walls of another station rushing by. You sway with the motion, your body adjusting instinctively. Around you, others do the same. There is a shared rhythm here, a collective balance that makes the movement feel almost smooth despite its constant motion. Across from you, a young man in uniform sits with his cap resting in his lap. His posture is straight, but his eyes are distant, focused on something beyond the immediate space. A woman beside him glances in his direction, then looks away again, as if unsure whether to speak. Uniforms are common here. Sailors, soldiers, nurses, each one moving through the same spaces as everyone else, yet carrying a different weight. Their presence changes the atmosphere slightly. Conversations soften. Glances linger a little longer. Historians still argue whether the visibility of military personnel in everyday settings helped maintain public morale, or whether it served as a constant reminder of the uncertainty ahead. As you stand here, it feels like both. Comfort and tension side by side. The train slows. Another station arrives, its platform briefly illuminated as the doors open again. More people step in, more step out. The balance shifts slightly, then settles once more. You find yourself standing closer to the centre of the car, now your shoulder lightly touching that of the man beside you. Neither of you acknowledges it. There is an understanding that space is limited and adjustments are part of the routine. A child's voice rises briefly from the far end of the car, asking a question you cannot quite hear. An adult answers in a calm, steady tone. The child quiets, perhaps reassured, perhaps simply distracted by something new. You look up at the route map above the door. Lines and names stretch across it, in a pattern that feels both complex and familiar. Each stop represents a different part of the city, a different set of lives unfolding above ground. Factories, offices, homes, shops, all connected by these moving cars beneath the surface. You wonder how many stories pass through this space each day. How many worries, how many small hopes, how many quiet plans for the future. The train continues. The motion becomes almost soothing after a while, a steady back and forth that lulls the senses. The sound of the wheels against the tracks forms a kind of rhythm, repetitive and constant. It is easy to imagine how someone might drift into a light sleep here, held upright by the press of the crowd and the predictability of the journey. You feel it yourself, not quite sleep, but a softening of awareness. The edges of your thoughts blur slightly, replaced by the simple experience of movement and sound. The city above feels distant for a moment, replaced by this enclosed world of metal and motion. Then the train slows again. Your stop approaches. You prepare to move, shifting your weight and adjusting your grip on the pole. Others do the same, each person anticipating their own exit point with quiet precision. When the doors open, you step forward with the flow emerging back onto the platform. The air here feels cooler. You take a breath, letting the stillness of the station settle around you. It is less crowded than the last, the movement more measured. A few people walk along the platform, their footsteps echoing softly. A worker in a uniform stands near the edge, watching the tracks with a practiced eye. You make your way toward the stairs. As you climb, the sound of the city begins to return, faint at first, then clearer with each step. Voices, traffic, the distant call of something you cannot quite identify. The world above is waiting, already in motion. You reach the top and step back into the daylight. It feels brighter now, the sun having fully risen while you are underground. The buildings stand in sharp relief against the sky, their details no longer softened by evening or shadow. The street is busier here, the pace quicker, the sense of purpose stronger. You pause for just a moment, adjusting to the change. Then you move forward again, carried by the same steady current that drew you down into the subway and back up again. The city does not pause for transitions. It simply continues layer upon layer, above and below, always in motion. And as you join the flow once more, you carry with you the quiet understanding that beneath every step you take, the city is still moving, still carrying its people, still connecting one moment to the next. Even when you cannot see it, you emerge fully into the brightness of morning, the memory of the subway's enclosed rhythm still lingering faintly in your body. Above ground, everything feels sharper. The air is cooler, touched by a light breeze that moves along the avenues, as if guided by the geometry of the buildings themselves. The sidewalks are busier now, not yet overwhelming, but clearly building towards something fuller. You are drawn almost immediately toward a small cluster of activity at the corner. A newsstand stands there, its wooden frame packed tightly with newspapers, magazines, and small items arranged with deliberate care. The man behind it moves quickly, folding papers, exchanging coins, answering questions that seem to arrive from all directions at once. His hands are steady, his voice practiced. This is not just a place to buy news. It is a place where the city briefly gathers to understand itself. You step closer. The headlines are bold, printed in large type that demands attention. Words about distant battles, shifting alliances, victories and losses. Names of places you may never have seen yet now feel strangely familiar. Europe. The Pacific. Each one carries weight even when reduced to ink on paper. A widely acknowledged historical detail is that newspapers were one of the primary ways Americans followed the progress of the war, with multiple editions printed throughout the day to keep pace with rapidly changing information. You can see that urgency here. Some papers are still warm from the press, their pages slightly stiff, as if they have not yet settled into themselves. A man beside you buys a copy and unfolds it immediately, scanning the front page with quick searching eyes. His brow tightens for a moment, then smooths again. It is a subtle reaction, but you notice it. The way people read now is different. Not just curiosity, but a kind of quiet vigilance. Behind you, a radio crackles to life. The sound comes from a nearby shop, its door propped open to inviting customers, and unintentionally anyone passing by. The voice on the radio is calm, measured, almost soothing in its steadiness. It delivers updates in a tone that suggests control, even when the content might suggest otherwise. You turn slightly, listening. There is something about hearing the news spoken aloud that feels different from reading it. More immediate, perhaps. More difficult to ignore. A small group has gathered near the doorway, each person standing just close enough to hear clearly, but not so close as to block the entrance. No one speaks. They simply listen. An interesting and lesser-known observation from this period is that many New Yorkers would pause in exactly this way, forming spontaneous audiences around radios placed in shop windows or cafes, sharing moments of information in quiet, collective attention. It creates a sense of connection that is subtle but real. You glance back at the newsstand. The vendor is already handing out more papers, his movements uninterrupted by the gravity of what those pages contain. There is a rhythm to his work that mirrors the larger rhythm of the city. Information arrives. It is distributed. Life continues. You purchase a paper yourself. The texture is slightly rough beneath your fingers, the ink faintly smudging if you press too hard. You fold it once, then again, holding it at your side as you step away from the corner. You do not read it immediately. Instead, you let its presence settle like something you will return to when the moment feels right. You continue walking. The street opens into a broader avenue lined with taller buildings and more movement. Delivery carts pass by their wheels, rattling softly over uneven pavement. A bus pulls to a stop, releasing a small wave of passengers who quickly merge into the flow of the sidewalk. You notice how often people carry newspapers now, folded under arms, tucked into bags, held loosely in one hand, while the other manages a briefcase or shopping parcel. It is as if the entire city is holding onto the same thread of information, each person connecting to it in their own way. Some read. As they walk, their eyes moving quickly across the page, occasionally glancing up to avoid collisions. Others wait, perhaps saving the act of reading for a quieter moment. There's no single way to engage with it, but the presence of the news is everywhere. Researchers continue to discuss how media shaped public perception during the war years, whether it offered clarity or reinforced a carefully managed sense of optimism. As you watch the people around you, it seems likely that both were true. The information is real, but so is the way it is presented, framed in a manner that supports endurance. You pass a cafe where a few tables sit just inside the window. Several patrons have already settled in cups of coffee in front of them, newspapers spread wide. Their conversations are low, punctuated by occasional pauses as one person reads something aloud or points to a particular line. There is a shared processing happening here, a quiet exchange of understanding. You slow your pace slightly, allowing yourself to observe. One man taps the edge of his paper thoughtfully, then folds it with a decisive motion as if arriving at a conclusion. Another continues reading, his expression unchanged, perhaps absorbing more than he shows. A woman at the end of the table listens, her gaze moving between the speakers, her own paper still untouched. You move on. The city continues to unfold around you, each block offering a slightly different version of the same pattern. Information circulating, people reacting, life adjusting in small continuous ways. You finally unfold your own newspaper. The pages open with a soft rustle, the printed words arranged in neat columns that guide your eyes from one line to the next. You read slowly, not rushing, allowing each piece of information to settle before moving on. Some of it feels distant, some of it feels closer than you would expect. You notice smaller stories as well, local updates, community events, notices that seem almost ordinary in comparison to the larger headlines. Yet they are there, woven into the same pages, reminding you that life is not defined by a single narrative. Even now, especially now, there are multiple layers to each day. You fold the paper again and tuck it under your arm. There is a sense that you have taken in enough for the moment. The details will remain lingering somewhere in your thoughts as you continue through the day. You do not need to carry every word with you. You look ahead. The avenue stretches forward, filled with movement and light. The city feels fully awake now, its earlier softness replaced by a steady, purposeful energy. And yet beneath that energy there is something quieter, a shared awareness that runs through everything, connecting each person in ways that are not always visible. You take a breath and step forward again. The news has been read, the day has begun. And the city, informed and alert, continues to move. You carry the folded newspaper with you as the avenue gradually narrows into a busier commercial stretch where office buildings stand beside smaller shops, their windows already catching the full strength of the morning light. The rhythm here feels slightly faster. Shoes strike pavement with sharper intention, doors open and close more frequently. Conversations are shorter, more focused. You begin to notice something else. The movement of women through this space has a particular clarity to it, a quiet confidence shaped by necessity as much as choice. They walk with purpose, their clothing practical but carefully arranged. Skirts that allow for movement, blouses that balance formality and comfort, coats that suggest both style and restraint. A firmly established historical understanding is that during the 1940s, many women in New York and across the United States entered the workforce in greater numbers, taking on roles in offices, factories and services as men left for military duty. The change is visible here, not in a dramatic shift, but in the steady presence of women moving through spaces that might have felt different only a few years earlier. You fall into step behind one of them. She carries a small handbag and a neatly folded coat over her arm, her pace measured but quick enough to keep up with the flow. As she reaches the entrance of an office building, she pauses briefly to adjust her gloves, then disappears inside without hesitation. It's a small moment, but it holds a sense of routine that feels newly important. You continue walking. Ahead, a storefront displays a collection of uniforms behind glass. Not military uniforms this time, but work attire. Practical dresses, aprons, garments designed for movement and durability. A sign in the window highlights efficiency, reliability, contribution. The language feels purposeful, almost persuasive. Inside, a saleswoman assists a customer holding up a piece of fabric to catch the light. They speak quietly, their attention focused on details that matter in a time when resources are not unlimited. Every purchase carries weight. Every choice reflects both personal need and broader circumstance. A lesser known but intriguing detail is that many clothing designs during the war years were influenced by government guidelines that encouraged conservation of fabric, resulting in simpler cuts and fewer decorative elements. Fashion adapts just as everything else does. You step back onto the sidewalk. A group of women stands near the corner waiting to cross. One of them holds a clipboard, her expression attentive as she speaks to the others. You catch fragments of conversation, words like schedules, shifts, deliveries. It sounds like coordination, the kind that keeps larger systems running smoothly. The light changes and they move together across the street. You follow at a slight distance, observing how naturally they navigate the space. There is no hesitation, no sense of novelty. This is simply how things are now. The roles have expanded and the city has adjusted accordingly. There's also something quieter beneath the surface. You notice it in the brief pauses, the way a woman glances at a passing soldier or checks her watch with a hint of concern. Responsibility has grown, but so has the emotional weight that accompanies it. Work is not just work. It is part of something larger, something that extends beyond the boundaries of the city. Scholars continue to examine how this period reshaped expectations for women, questioning whether these changes led to lasting shifts in independence, or whether many were later reversed when the war ended. As you move through the street, the answer feels uncertain. What you see is real, immediate. What it will become remains unknown. You pass a small office building where the windows are open just enough to let in the air. Inside, rows of desks stretch across the room, each one occupied. Typewriters click in steady rhythm, their sound sharp and consistent, forming a kind of mechanical heartbeat. Papers move from one desk to another. Voices remain low focused. The work is precise, structured, essential. You pause just long enough to take it in. A woman sits near the window, her fingers moving quickly across the keys, her posture upright and composed. There is no hesitation in her movement. She has done this many times before. The repetition has become skill. The skill has become confidence. You move on. The street opens again, revealing a small park bordered by iron fencing. A few benches sit in the sunlight, occupied by women who have stepped away from their duties for a brief moment. One reads a letter, her expression softening as her eyes move across the page. Another simply sits, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze unfocused, perhaps allowing herself a moment of quiet. You choose not to interrupt the stillness. Instead, you continue along the edge of the park, letting the scene settle in your mind. The contrast is gentle but clear. Movement and pause. Responsibility and rest. Each one necessary, each one shaping the rhythm of the day. You reach another intersection. A streetcar passes its windows, filled with faces that mirror the ones you have already seen, focused, calm, carrying something just beneath the surface. The city does not stop to reflect for long. It keeps moving, and so do the people within it. You glance down at your folded newspaper. The headlines are still there, unchanged. The larger story continues to unfold, regardless of individual routines. And yet it is these routines that give structure to everything else. Without them, the uncertainty would feel too large to manage. You look up again. A woman exits a building nearby, adjusting her hat as she steps into the light. She pauses briefly, taking in the street before choosing her direction. Then she moves her pace steady, her path clear. You find yourself doing the same. There is no need to rush, but there is also no reason to stand still. The city carries you forward just as it carries everyone else. Each step feels connected to something broader, even if you cannot always define it. And as you continue along the sidewalk, surrounded by the quiet determination of those around you, you begin to understand how change takes shape here. Not all at once, but in countless small movements, each one steady, each one necessary. You drift with the flow of the avenue until the buildings begin to change in subtle ways. The polished fronts of offices give way to structures that feel more utilitarian. They're brick, dark, their windows larger but less decorative. The air shifts too. There is a sharper edge to it now, something mechanical, something active. You follow that change. The street slopes gently toward the waterfront, and with each block the sound grows deeper, not louder in the chaotic sense, but fuller. Metal striking metal, engines idling, voices calling out in short, efficient bursts. It's a different kind of rhythm from the one you felt in the subway or along the morning sidewalks. This is where things are made moved and sent outward. A well-documented aspect of wartime New York is the intense activity along its docks and industrial zones where ships were loaded with supplies, machinery, and materials destined for distant fronts. Standing here, you can see how that effort translates into daily motion. Crates are stacked in careful rows. Workers move between them with practiced coordination. Nothing feels random. Everything has a purpose. You pause near a wide gate that opens onto a busy yard. Beyond it, men in heavy jackets guide the movement of goods with steady gestures. A crane lifts a large container slowly into the air, its cables taut, its motion deliberate. You find yourself watching the arc of its movement, the way it rises, shifts and settles into place with quiet precision. No one rushes the process. Speed matters, but control matters more. A truck pulls in beside you, its tyres crunching lightly against the uneven ground. The driver leans out, exchanging a few quick words with the worker at the gate before continuing forward. There is no wasted conversation. Each exchange is brief, efficient, understood. A small but intriguing observation from this environment is that many dock workers develop their own systems of signals and shorthand communication, allowing them to coordinate complex tasks without needing long explanations. You can see traces of that here. A nod, a hand gesture, a glance that carries more meaning than a sentence. You step a little closer, careful not to interfere. The smell here is distinct. Salt from the nearby water, oil from machinery, wood from the crates. It is not unpleasant, but it is strong, grounding you firmly in the physical reality of the work being done. You look toward the water. Ships sit at the docks, their hulls rising above the edge of the pier. Some are being loaded, others appear ready to depart. Their surfaces are marked by use, not polished or decorative, but functional. Each one represents a journey that extends far beyond the horizon you can see. You imagine where they might go, across the Atlantic, into contested waters, toward destinations that carry both necessity and risk. Debate among historians continues regarding how efficiently American port cities like New York managed the enormous logistical demands of the war, balancing speed with safety under constant pressure. Watching the careful pace of the workers here, you sense that efficiency is not just about moving quickly. It is about moving correctly again and again. A whistle sounds somewhere in the distance. It cuts through the layered noise, sharp and clear. Workers respond almost immediately, shifting positions, adjusting their tasks. The sound fades, but its effect remains. It is a signal, a marker of time or instruction integrated into the rhythm of the place. You move along the edge of the yard, following the line of the waterfront. A group of men sits briefly on a low wall, taking a short break. Their posture is relaxed, but not fully at ease. One of them leans forward, elbows on his knees, speaking quietly to the others. Another stares out at the water, his expression unreadable. You do not linger long enough to hear what they are saying, but you sense the weight behind it. Work here is not abstract, it connects directly to events unfolding far away. You continue walking. The pier stretches out ahead, its wooden planks, worn smooth by years of use. You step onto it, feeling the slight give beneath your feet. The water laps gently against the sides, its surface reflecting the light in shifting patterns. For a moment the sound softens. The deeper noise of the yard recedes slightly, replaced by the quieter rhythm of the water. It is a brief contrast, a pause within the larger movement. You take a breath, letting the air settle in your lungs. Then the sound returns. Another crane moves. Another truck arrives. Another set of crates is lifted, shifted, secured. You notice how coordinated everything is. No single person controls the entire process. Yet it functions as if guided by a shared understanding. Each worker knows their role. Each movement fits into a larger pattern. It is not perfect, but it is consistent. You step back from the edge of the pier and return to the main path. A man passes you carrying a clipboard, his steps quick but measured. He glances briefly at the yard, then down at his notes, then back again. His focus is intense, his attention divided between observation and record. Nearby, another worker checks a set of markings on a crate, running his hand along the surface, as if confirming something by touch as well as sight. These small acts of verification happen constantly, ensuring that what is sent out matches what is needed. You begin to understand something about this place. It is not just about production, it is about trust. Each item must reach its destination. Each shipment must be accurate. The stakes are too high for careless mistakes. You move away from the waterfront, retracing your steps toward the street. The transition is gradual. The heavy sounds of the docks fade into the more familiar rhythm of the city. Footsteps replace machinery. Voices become less abrupt, more conversational. The air loses some of its sharpness, returning to the layered mix you encountered earlier. You glance back once more. The ships remain where they are, steady against the water. The workers continue their tasks, their movements blending into a continuous flow that does not pause for observation. Then you turn forward again. The city stretches out ahead, offering another set of experiences, another layer of life unfolding at its own pace. The work of the waterfront remains behind you, but its presence lingers, a reminder of the unseen connections that tie this place to a much larger world. And as you step back into the steady movement of the street, you carry with you a quiet awareness that beneath the ordinary routines of the day, something vast is in motion, and it never truly stops. You leave the sharper edge of the waterfront behind and drift back into streets that feel more familiar, though no less alive. The buildings soften again into a mix of small businesses and narrow storefronts, their signs painted in colours that try their best to look cheerful, despite the limitations of the time. The air changes with them. Less oil, more warmth. Less machinery, more food. It draws you in almost immediately. A modest lunch counter sits halfway down the block, its glass window slightly fogged from the heat inside. You can see movement through it. Hands passing plates, cups being filled. someone wiping the counter in quick circular motions. The door opens and closes with steady rhythm, each time releasing a wave of scent that feels grounding in a way you did not expect. You step inside. The space is narrow, lined with stools that run along a polished counter. Behind it, a worker moves with quiet efficiency, turning from stove to coffee pot to register in a pattern that feels almost automatic. The sound here is softer than the street, but constant. Utensils clink lightly. Plates settle with a muted tap. Voices remain low, blending into a steady hum. You take a seat. The stool creaks slightly beneath you, then steadies. The surface of the counter is smooth, worn by years of use. There is something reassuring about it, a sense that many people have passed through here before you, each one taking a brief pause before returning to the larger movement of the day. An established historical observation is that lunch counters and small diners played a central role in everyday urban life during the 1940s, offering quick, affordable meals to workers who had little time to spare. You can feel that function clearly here. No one lingers too long, but no one rushes unnecessarily either. A cup of coffee is placed in front of you. The aroma rises immediately rich and slightly bitter, softened by the warmth of the cup in your hands. You take a small sip. It is simple, not elaborate, but it does exactly what it needs to do. It steadies you, grounds you. Next to you, a man unfolds his sandwich with careful attention, as if making sure nothing is wasted. Across the counter, a woman adds a measured amount of sugar to her drink, stirring slowly, watching the liquid settle before taking a sip. Conversations move quietly between them. Nothing dramatic. Fragments of daily life, work schedules, a mention of ration coupons, a brief comment about something read in the morning paper. Each exchange is small, but together they create a sense of continuity that feels almost protective. A lesser known detail from this period is that some diners would adjust their menus daily based on what ingredients were available, resulting in subtle variations that regular customers learned to anticipate. You notice a small chalkboard behind the counter, its writing slightly uneven, listing items that may or may not appear again tomorrow. You order something simple. When it arrives, it is placed in front of you with a quiet nod. The portion is modest, carefully prepared, nothing excessive. You begin to eat slowly, aware of how each bite fits into the larger rhythm of the space. There is no extravagance here, but there is care. You glance around. The people seated beside you are all in different stages of their day. Some have just arrived, their coats still on their movements, slightly hurried. Others are already finishing placing coins on the counter before stepping back into the street. The turnover is steady, almost seamless. Discussion among social historians often centres on how these small public spaces provided not just nourishment but also a sense of normalcy during uncertain times. Sitting here, it is easy to understand why. The routine itself becomes a form of reassurance. You finish your meal and rest your hands lightly on the counter. For a moment you do nothing. You simply sit. The sounds continue around you unchanged by your pause. The worker behind the counter moves to the next task. A new customer takes the seat beside you. The rhythm does not depend on any one person. It carries on, steady and reliable. You leave a few coins and stand. The stool shifts slightly as you step away, then settles again, ready for the next person. You move toward the door, pushing it open and stepping back into the brightness of the street. The contrast is immediate. Outside, the air feels cooler again, the light sharper. The noise expands outward, no longer contained by walls and conversation. Yet something from inside the diner remains with you, a quiet steadiness, a sense of having paused without falling behind. You walk on. A bakery appears a few doors down its window, filled with neatly arranged loaves and pastries. Not an abundance, but enough to suggest continuity. A woman stands just inside, speaking with the baker, her gestures thoughtful as she makes her selection. Further along, a small grocery displays its goods with careful spacing, each item given room to appear more plentiful than it might actually be. The effort is subtle but visible. Presentation matters even now. You notice how people move in and out of these spaces. Each stop is brief, purposeful. A purchase, a conversation, a moment of decision, then back to the sidewalk, back to the flow. You glance down at your hands. They still carry a faint warmth from the coffee cup, a lingering trace of the pause you allowed yourself. It fades slowly, replaced by the cooler air of the street. You take a breath. The city continues around you unchanged in its pace, yet slightly altered in how you experience it. The break did not stop the movement. It simply gave you a different way to step back into it. And as you continue along the sidewalk, surrounded by the quiet exchanges of daily life, you begin to notice something subtle. Even in a time defined by rationing and restraint, there are still small spaces where comfort finds a way to exist. Not loudly, not extravagantly, but enough. Always just enough. You continue along the avenue until the streets begin to shift once more, not abruptly, but with a gradual change in rhythm, language and sound. The storefronts carry different names now, some painted in bold lettering, others in careful script. Music drifts faintly from somewhere ahead, not loud but distinct enough to draw your attention. You follow it. The sidewalks here feel fuller in a different way. Not just movement, but presence. People linger a little longer at corners. Conversations stretch slightly beyond necessity. The air carries a mix of familiar city scents with something richer layered beneath. Cooking spices, tobacco perfume, all blending into something unmistakably alive. You have entered Harlem. A widely recognised historical truth is that Harlem in the 1940s remained a vital cultural and social centre for black New Yorkers, shaped by the earlier Harlem Renaissance, and continuing to foster music, art and political thought. Even as the war reshapes the broader city, this neighbourhood holds its own rhythm, its own identity within the larger whole. You walk more slowly now. There is no need to hurry here. The pace invites observation. A group stands outside a storefront speaking in animated tones, their gestures expressive but controlled. Laughter rises briefly, then settles again into conversation. A man leans in a doorway, watching the street with quiet attentiveness, as if reading its patterns. The music becomes clearer. A radio somewhere inside a building plays a jazz tune, its melody smooth and steady, carried out through an open window. The notes move easily through the air, weaving between the sounds of footsteps and passing voices. It does not dominate the space, it becomes part of it. You pause beneath the window listening. The rhythm feels different from the mechanical beat of the subway or the measured pace of the docks. It breathes, it shifts, it allows for variation, for expression. Even in its softness, it carries a quiet confidence. A small but intriguing detail is that many musicians in Harlem during this period performed both in formal venues and in informal settings, allowing music to spill out into everyday life in ways that blurred the line between performance and environment. You can sense that here. The music is not separate from the street. It belongs to it. You continue walking. A church stands at the corner, Its doors open just enough to reveal movement inside. Voices rise and fall in a pattern that suggests singing, though you cannot quite make out the words. The sound is layered, collective, carrying both strength and calm. You stand for a moment at the edge of the entrance. Inside, people are gathered, their attention focused forward. The space feels grounded, steady, a place where the outside world is acknowledged but not allowed to overwhelm. You do not enter, but the presence of it lingers as you step away. Further down the block, a small barbershop hums with activity. Men sit in chairs along the wall, waiting their turn, while others engage in conversation that moves easily between humour and seriousness. A barber works with careful precision, his hands steady as he shapes the line of a haircut. The mirror reflects not just the person in the chair, but the room behind him, multiplying the sense of presence. You catch fragments of discussion. News from the war, local concerns, personal stories. The topics shift naturally without formal structure. Each voice adds something, even if only briefly. The exchange itself seems as important as the content. Researchers often note that spaces like these served as informal centres of communication and community, where information and opinion could circulate freely within trusted environments. Standing here, you can see how that happens. The conversation is fluid, responsive, grounded in shared experience. You move on. A woman walks past you carrying a basket, her posture upright, her expression composed. She nods slightly as she passes another woman, a brief acknowledgement that carries familiarity without requiring words. These small gestures appear often here, subtle signs of connection that do not demand attention. You notice the children. They move through the street with a different kind of energy, less constrained, more expressive. A group plays a game near the curb, their movements quick and inventive, their laughter rising above the surrounding sounds. Even here, even now, there is space for play. You slow your pace again. The neighbourhood invites it. A storefront displays records in its window, their covers arranged to catch the eye. Names you may not recognise immediately, but whose presence is felt in the music, drifting through the streets. A man stands inside, carefully selecting one, turning it over in his hands, as if weighing its significance. Another doorway reveals a small cafe, its interior dim but welcoming. A few tables are occupied, conversations, low gestures, relaxed. The pace here feels unhurried, even within the larger movement of the day. Scholars continue to examine how Harlem balanced cultural vibrancy with the social and economic challenges faced by its residents during this era, noting both resilience and constraint existing side by side. As you walk, that balance feels tangible. There is energy here, but also effort, expression, but also endurance. You reach a corner and pause. The street stretches out in both directions, each path offering its own set of details, its own version of the same layered experience. You choose one at random, allowing the environment to guide you rather than any particular destination. A man stands on the sidewalk, playing a trumpet softly, his notes controlled, almost private, despite being in public space. People pass by, some pausing briefly, others continuing without interruption. The music exists whether or not it is acknowledged. You stand for a moment listening, then you move on. The sound fades behind you, replaced by the steady hum of the street. The transition is smooth, almost imperceptible. One layer gives way to another, each one part of the same larger composition. You take a breath. The air here feels different, not cleaner or heavier, but distinct in its texture, shaped by the lives unfolding within it. You carry that difference with you as you continue, aware that each neighbourhood in this city holds its own rhythm, its own way of moving through time. And as you step forward, leaving Harlem gradually behind, you realise something quiet but important. The city is not a single story. It is many, each one unfolding at once, each one shaping the whole. You ease back into a busier commercial stretch where shop windows line the street in careful rows, each one arranged to catch your attention without promising too much. The displays are thoughtful, almost strategic. Items are spaced just enough to appear plentiful, though you can sense the limits beneath the surface. You slow your pace, drawn towards the details. A grocery store sits on the corner, its door opening and closing with steady rhythm. Inside shelves hold neatly stacked goods, each label facing outward as if standing at attention. You step in and the sound of the street softens behind you, replaced by the quieter shuffle of movement within a confined space. A well-established historical point is that rationing became a central part of daily life in the United States during the Second World War, affecting items such as sugar meat, butter and gasoline. Here, that reality is visible in small but constant ways. A woman stands near the counter holding a booklet of ration stamps. She flips through it, carefully, her fingers pausing as she counts. The shopkeeper watches with patient attention, waiting for the moment when she settles on her choice. There is no impatience in the exchange. Both understand that this is how things work now. You move further inside. The shelves hold familiar items, but not always in the quantities you might expect. Some spaces are filled with alternatives. Others hold only a few remaining pieces. A handwritten sign offers a suggestion for substitution, guiding customers toward what is available rather than what is missing. A small but curious observation from this period is that cookbooks and magazines often published creative recipes designed specifically to work around rationing, encouraging households to adapt rather than go without. You can almost imagine those recipes taking shape in kitchens not far from here, each one a quiet act of adjustment. You pick up a small item from the shelf. It feels ordinary in your hand, yet carries a weight that goes beyond its size. This is not just a purchase. It is a decision shaped by limitation, by planning, by awareness of what might be needed later. You place it back. A man nearby studies a display of canned goods, his brow slightly furrowed as he considers his options. He picks one up, examines the label, then sets it down again before choosing another. The process is deliberate, thoughtful, almost careful in a way that feels new. Researchers continue to explore how rationing influenced consumer behaviour, suggesting that it encouraged a more mindful approach to purchasing, where necessity replaced impulse in many cases. Watching the people around you, it is easy to see that shift in action. You move toward the counter. The shopkeeper greets each customer with a steady nod, his movements efficient but not hurried. He checks stamps, counts items, wraps, purchases in paper that is folded with practiced precision. Each step follows a pattern that has become second nature. You step back outside. The light feels brighter again, the air more open after the contained space of the shop. You carry nothing with you, yet you feel as if you have gained a clearer understanding of how the city adjusts itself to the limits placed upon it. You continue along the street. A clothing store displays garments in its window, each one designed with simplicity in mind. The cuts are clean, the lines are practical, there is elegance in the restraint, a quiet acknowledgement that excess is no longer the goal. Inside, a woman examines a dress, running her hand along the fabric, as if measuring its worth by touch as much as sight. The shop assistant stands nearby, offering quiet suggestions, pointing out details that matter within the boundaries of what is available. You move on. A butcher shop appears next its window, more sparsely filled than you might expect. Cuts of meat are arranged carefully, each one given space to appear more substantial. A small sign lists prices and limits, reminding customers of the rules that shape each purchase. You pause briefly. A customer steps forward, presenting ration stamps with a calm expression. The exchange is quick, almost routine, yet it carries an underlying awareness that these transactions are part of something larger. An ongoing academic discussion considers whether rationing strengthened a sense of collective responsibility among citizens, or whether it created quiet frustration beneath the surface. As you observe the interactions here, both possibilities feel present. There is cooperation, there is patience, but there is also the subtle tension of limitation. You walk further. The street continues to offer variations on the same theme. A bakery with carefully arranged loaves. A small market with produce displayed in modest quantities. A shop selling household goods, each item chosen for practicality rather than decoration. People move in and out of these spaces with steady purpose. There is less browsing, more deciding. Less wandering, more intention. Each stop is part of a larger plan, even if that plan is not spoken aloud. You notice how conversations reflect this shift. A brief exchange about what is available. A quiet suggestion for a substitute. A shared understanding that things are different now and that adjustment is part of the process. You take a breath. The air carries a mix of scents from the surrounding shops, blending into something that feels both familiar and altered. It is still the city you have been walking through, but shaped by a new set of conditions. You glance at the windows again. They continue to present their offerings with care, each display an effort to maintain a sense of normal life within the constraints of the time. It is not about hiding the limitations, it is about working within them. You continue walking. The sidewalk stretches ahead, filled with the quiet determination of those moving through their daily routines. Each person carries their own set of calculations, their own approach to managing what is available and what is needed. And as you move with them, you begin to understand something subtle. Scarcity does not stop the city. It reshapes it, guides it, teaches it to move differently, one careful choice at a time. You continue along the sidewalk, the rhythm of rationed shops and measured purchases gradually giving way to something quieter, more inward. The street remains active, but your attention shifts. It's no longer drawn to what people carry in their hands, but to what they carry in their thoughts. You notice it first in the way people pause near doorways. A woman stands just outside an apartment building holding a small envelope between her fingers. She does not open it immediately. Instead, she looks at it for a moment as if preparing herself for whatever is inside. Then slowly she slips her finger beneath the seal and unfolds the paper within. Her expression changes, but only slightly. It is a controlled reaction. Something felt then carefully contained. A widely accepted historical insight is that letters were the primary connection between those at home and those serving overseas during the war, often taking weeks to arrive and carrying both comfort and anxiety in equal measure. Standing here, you can feel that weight in a single piece of paper. You move on. A small post office sits midway down the block, its entrance marked by a steady flow of people coming and going. You step inside, drawn by the quiet urgency that seems to gather within its walls. The space is orderly. Lines form and dissolve with quiet efficiency. Clerks move behind the counter, sorting, stamping, handing over envelopes and parcels with practiced precision. The air carries the faint scent of paper and ink mixed with something slightly metallic from the equipment used to process it all. You take a place near the back, observing. Each person ahead of you holds something different: a letter, a package, a stack of documents tied neatly together. The contents are hidden, but their significance is not. Every item represents a connection, a message moving from one place to another. A small yet telling detail from this time is that many families develop rituals around letter writing, setting aside specific times each week to compose messages that balanced honesty with reassurance. You can almost imagine those moments taking place in the apartments you passed earlier, words chosen carefully, rewritten, reconsidered. At the counter, a man hands over a parcel wrapped in brown paper. The clerk weighs it, stamps it, and places it aside with a small, deliberate motion. The transaction is simple, but it carries a sense of importance that goes beyond the exchange itself. You step outside again. The light feels slightly softer now, though the day is still well underway. You continue walking, your thoughts lingering on the idea of distance. Not just physical distance, but emotional distance. The space between knowing and not knowing. A telephone booth stands at the corner. Its glass panels reflect the street, creating a layered image of movement and stillness. Inside, a woman holds the receiver close, her voice low but intense. You cannot hear her words, but you can see the way she listens, the way she pauses, the way she speaks again, with careful emphasis. Telephone calls are possible, but not always easy. Lines are busy. Connections are not always clear. Conversations are often brief, shaped by time limits and technical constraints. Yet even a few minutes of direct communication can carry a different kind of reassurance than a letter. You pass by quietly. Further along, a man stands near a building entrance reading a telegram. The paper is small. The message likely short. His posture is still, his focus complete. Telegrams arrive quickly, but they are often associated with urgency, sometimes with news that cannot wait. You do not linger. The moment feels private, even in a public space. A line of academic inquiry continues to explore how communication technologies during the war shaped emotional experiences, suggesting that the delay of letters and the brevity of telegrams created a unique rhythm of anticipation and response. As you move through the street, that rhythm feels present in subtle ways. You notice how often people check their mailboxes. A brief pause at the entrance of a building. A glance inside. A moment of expectation followed by either quiet satisfaction or a subtle shift in expression. These small acts repeat throughout the city, each one part of a larger pattern. You walk past a small stationery shop. Its window displays envelopes, writing paper and ink in neat arrangements. Inside, a customer examines a set of stationery with careful attention, perhaps considering how best to present their words on the page. The act of writing becomes something more deliberate in this context. Not just communication, but connection. You continue walking. The street feels steady, unchanged in its outward appearance, yet your awareness of it has deepened. You begin to see the invisible threads that link people across distance carried through letters, calls and messages. You reach a quiet stretch where the noise of traffic softens slightly. For a moment you pause. You imagine the journeys of those letters, the time they spend in transit, the hands they pass through, the moment they are finally opened, read, held close. You take a breath. The air carries the same mix of city scents you have come to recognize, but now they feel layered with something less tangible: expectation, hope, uncertainty. You step forward again. The city continues unchanged in its movement, yet filled with these unseen exchanges. Each person you pass may be waiting for something, or sending something, or holding on to words that have already arrived. And as you move with them, you begin to understand something quiet but profound. Not all connections are visible. Some travel slowly, some arrive all at once. But all of them shape the way this city feels moment by moment. You leave the quieter stretch behind and step into a broader avenue where movement gathers again, fuller now, more layered. The sound rises not sharply but steadily like a tide returning. Footsteps, engines, voices all blending into something continuous. And then you begin to notice the uniforms. At first, it is just one figure moving past you, a young man in a neatly pressed navy uniform, his posture straight, his pace confident but not hurried. Then another appears, this time in army khaki, walking beside a woman whose arm brushes lightly against his sleeve as they move together. Soon they are everywhere. A commonly recognised feature of wartime cities like New York is the visible presence of military personnel moving through everyday public spaces, especially in transit hubs, streets, and entertainment districts. It changes the atmosphere in a way that is difficult to define but easy to feel. You slow your pace slightly. A group of sailors stands near the entrance of a cafe, their voices relaxed, their expressions open. One of them laughs, the sound rising above the surrounding noise for just a moment before settling back into the flow. A passerby glances in their direction, then continues on as if acknowledging their presence without interrupting it. You move closer. There is something about the uniforms that draws attention without demanding it. The crisp lines, the distinct colours, the subtle differences between branches that may not be immediately obvious, but become clearer the longer you look. A nurse passes by her uniform, equally precise, though softer in tone. She carries a small bag, her expression focused, her steps measured. People give her a slight space as she moves, not dramatically, but enough to recognise her role. A small but interesting detail is that uniforms during this period often influenced fashion trends, with elements of military style appearing in civilian clothing, reflecting both admiration and practicality. You can see hints of that around you. Structured coats, simple lines, a certain neatness that echoes what you see in the uniforms themselves. You continue walking. A soldier stands at a street corner, checking a piece of paper, perhaps directions or an address. He turns it slightly, then looks up, scanning the buildings around him. A woman nearby notices and steps closer, offering a few quiet words and a gesture down the street. He nods in thanks. The exchange is brief, but it carries a sense of connection that feels genuine. Small acts like this appear often subtle gestures of assistance that do not require attention. You pass a pair of young women walking together, their conversation animated but contained. As they approach a group of servicemen, their tone shifts slightly, their posture adjusting in ways that suggest both awareness and curiosity. There is a social dynamic here that feels delicate, shaped by circumstance and expectation. Researchers continue to examine how the presence of large numbers of military personnel in cities influence social interactions, particularly in terms of relationships etiquette and public behaviour. As you observe the people around you, those shifts are visible in small, almost unspoken ways. You notice how people look at the uniforms, not with uniform emotion, but with a range of responses. Respect, interest, concern, sometimes all at once. A glance that lingers a moment longer than usual. A nod that carries more meaning than a simple greeting. You pass a small shop where a radio plays softly near the door. Inside, a few men in uniform stand listening, their attention focused, their expressions serious. The rest of the shop continues its activity around them, but the sound of the broadcast creates a subtle centre of gravity. You do not stay long. The street draws you onward. A bus pulls up at the curb, and several uniformed figures step aboard, merging into the interior space with the same quiet efficiency you saw in the subway. Their presence does not disrupt the flow. It becomes part of it. You walk alongside the bus for a moment as it idles, then moves on. Further down the block, a small park offers a brief pause in the movement. A few benches are occupied, some by civilians, some by those in uniform. The distinction is visible, yet the shared space softens it. A soldier sits alone, his cap resting beside him, his gaze directed toward the ground. His posture is still not tense, but thoughtful. Nearby a couple speaks in low tones, their heads close together, their conversation private despite the public setting. You do not intrude. Instead, you continue along the edge of the park, allowing the scene to remain as it is. An ongoing discussion in historical research considers whether the everyday visibility of military life brought the realities of war closer to civilians, or whether it created a kind of normalization that made those realities easier to accept. As you move through this space, both possibilities feel present. The uniforms are a reminder, but they are also part of the routine. You reach another intersection. The light changes and people move forward together, blending into a single flow despite their differences. Civilian and military side by side, each carrying their own purpose, their own path. You cross with them. On the other side, the street continues, offering more of the same layered experience. Shops, voices, movement, all shaped by the presence of something larger than any single person. You take a breath. The air feels steady, the pace consistent. There is no dramatic shift, no sudden change, just the ongoing integration of these elements into the fabric of the city. And as you walk, surrounded by the quiet interplay of uniforms and everyday life, you begin to notice something subtle. The distinction between ordinary and extraordinary has softened. What once might have stood apart now exists within the same space, carried by the same streets, shared in the same moments. And in that blending, the city continues to move forward, steady and unbroken. You continue along the avenue, the presence of uniforms gradually blending into the wider rhythm of the street, until something else begins to draw your attention. A line has formed outside a building ahead, not tense or impatient, but quietly expectant. People stand in small clusters, speaking softly, or simply waiting, their focus directed toward a set of doors that open and close at steady intervals. You move closer. The sign above the entrance reveals it clearly, a movie theatre. The exterior is modest compared to the grand palaces you might imagine, yet it carries its own sense of invitation. Posters line the walls, their colours bold, their imagery dramatic, faces of actors, scenes of adventure, promises of stories that exist far beyond the limits of the present moment. A well-supported historical observation is that cinema attendance in the United States reached remarkable heights during the 1940s, as films offered both entertainment and a temporary escape from the pressures of wartime life. Standing here, you can feel that pull in the quiet patience of the crowd. You join the line. It moves slowly but steadily. The person ahead of you shifts their weight from one foot to the other, glancing occasionally at the posters as if reviewing the choices again. Behind you, a couple speaks in low tones, their conversation drifting between the film and something else, something personal. The doors open. A small group steps inside and the line advances. When your turn comes, you pass through the entrance, leaving the brightness of the street behind. The transition is immediate. The interior is dim, the light softened to a gentle glow that guides you without overwhelming your senses. The air is cooler here, carrying the faint scent of fabric seats, and something sweet perhaps from a nearby concession stand. You move toward the auditorium. The sound changes again. Outside, the city was layered and constant. Here it is focused. A low murmur of voices, the distant echo of the screen's soundtrack, the occasional rustle of movement as people settle into their seats. You find a place and sit. The chair cushions slightly beneath you, its surface worn but comfortable. Around you, others adjust their posture, some leaning back, others sitting forward with quiet anticipation. The lights dim further and the screen brightens. Before the feature begins, a newsreel appears. A factual detail often noted by historians is that wartime newsreels were a regular part of the cinema experience, providing audiences with visual updates on the progress of the war before the main film. The images flicker across the screen, accompanied by a narrator whose voice carries a tone of confidence and clarity. You watch. Scenes of distant places unfold in black and white. Movement machinery, faces you do not know. The information is presented in a way that feels both immediate and carefully shaped. It is real, yet framed within the limits of what can be shown. A subtle and somewhat surprising detail is that audiences sometimes responded audibly to these newsreels, reacting with applause or murmurs depending on what they saw. You hear a faint shift in the room now. Not loud, not disruptive, but present. A shared awareness moving through the audience. The newsreel ends. For a brief moment, the screen goes dark and the room settles into a deeper quiet. Then the main feature begins. The tone changes. Colour may still be absent, but the mood shifts entirely. The story draws you in its world distinct from the one outside. Characters move through their own challenges, their own narratives, offering a sense of distance that feels almost like relief. You feel it in your body. The way your shoulders relax slightly, the way your breathing slows, the way your attention narrows to the screen, leaving the rest of the world just beyond reach. Around you, others experience the same shift. The man beside you leans back, his posture easing. A woman a few rows ahead lets out a quiet laugh at a moment of humour. Someone behind you adjusts in their seat, then becomes still again. The film continues. Time passes differently here. Minutes stretch and compress without clear markers. The outside world feels paused, held at a distance by the darkness and the glow of the screen. Academic discussions often explore whether cinema during wartime served primarily as distraction or as a subtle reinforcement of shared values and morale. As you sit here, it seems to do both. It offers escape, but also connection, a shared experience that binds the audience together, if only for a short while. You glance briefly around the room. Faces are illuminated by the flickering light, each one reflecting the images on the screen. For a moment, the distinctions between people fade. Everyone is part of the same story, reacting to the same moments, carried along by the same narrative. You return your gaze to the screen. The story moves toward its conclusion, its pace steady, its resolution approaching. There is a sense of completion that feels satisfying even if temporary. The film ends. The lights rise slowly, not all at once, but enough to guide you back into awareness of the room. People begin to stand, stretching slightly, gathering their belongings. Conversations resume quiet at first, then gradually more defined. You rise with them. The exit leads you back through the dim hallway and toward the brightness beyond. As the door opens, the light of the street returns clear and immediate. You step outside. The city is still there, unchanged in its movement. Cars pass. Voices carry. The rhythm continues, as if the pause inside the theatre never occurred. And yet something has shifted. The brief escape has left a trace, a softening at the edges of your awareness. You carry it with you as you move forward, blending once more into the steady flow of the street. The war remains. The city continues. But for a little while, you stepped into another world. And now you return. You step away from the theatre and allow your eyes a moment to adjust the brightness of the street, settling gently back into place. The day has begun to lean toward evening now, not abruptly, but with a gradual softening of light. Shadows lengthen along the sidewalks. The pace of the city shifts again, just slightly, as work hours draw toward their end. You follow the flow without deciding where to go. It carries you toward a part of the city where the storefronts change character once more. Windows grow darker, their interiors less visible from the street. Signs glow softly, their lettering illuminated in warm tones that suggest something quieter, something contained. A line forms outside one of these places, though it looks different from the line at the theatre. People stand closer together, their posture more relaxed, their expressions less focused on time and more on anticipation. A doorman stands at the entrance, his presence calm but attentive, guiding the flow inside with quiet authority. You approach. The sound reaches you before you fully understand it. Music, but not the distant drifting kind you heard earlier. This is more immediate, a rhythm carried by instruments played in the same room. It moves through the doorway each time it opens, spilling briefly into the street before being drawn back inside. You step forward and enter. The transition is subtle but complete. The light dims, though not to darkness. Small lamps cast pools of warm glow across tables, arranged in careful rows. The air feels thicker here, layered with the scent of tobacco perfume, and something faintly sweet. Voices remain low-shaped to fit the atmosphere rather than break it. You pause just inside. A band plays at the far end of the room, their movements controlled, their expressions focused. The music carries a steady pulse, one that seems to guide everything else in the space. Conversations align with it. Movements adjust to it. Even the clink of glasses seems to fall into its pattern. An established historical perspective recognizes that nightclubs and jazz venues in 1940s New York served as important social spaces, offering both entertainment and a sense of release from the pressures of the day. You can feel that purpose clearly here. You move toward an empty table. A server approaches with quiet efficiency, placing a glass before you with a small nod. There is no rush, no unnecessary gesture. Everything is measured, deliberate, shaped by the rhythm of the room. At a nearby table, a couple leans toward each other, their conversation private despite the shared space. The woman's hand rests lightly on the edge of the table, her fingers tracing a slow pattern as she listens. The man speaks in a low tone, his expression softened by the dim light. You look toward the band again. The musicians shift into a new piece, the melody unfolding with a fluid ease that feels almost effortless. Each note connects to the next, forming a line that carries through the room without interruption. A curious detail sometimes noted by observers of this era is that certain clubs became known for unplanned performances where musicians would join in, spontaneously creating moments that were never repeated in quite the same way. There is a sense of that possibility here, even if it does not happen in this exact moment. You settle back slightly in your chair. The day begins to feel distant now, replaced by this contained world of sound and light. The city outside continues, but here time seems to stretch in a different direction. A group at the bar laughs softly, their conversation rising just enough to be heard before settling again. Glasses are lifted, set down, lifted again. Movements are unhurried, shaped by the environment rather than urgency. Analysts of cultural life often reflect on whether spaces like these offer genuine escape or simply reframe the same tensions in a different setting, allowing people to momentarily shift their perspective without leaving their concerns behind. As you sit here, it feels like both may be true. You notice how people hold themselves. Posture softens, shoulders lower, voices become more measured. The presence of the day's responsibilities does not disappear, but it becomes less immediate, less pressing. You take a slow sip from your glass. The taste is simple, but the act itself feels significant. A pause within the larger flow of time. A moment shaped by intention rather than necessity. The music changes again. This time the rhythm invites movement. A few people rise from their tables, stepping onto a small dance floor near the band. Their steps are controlled, practiced, but not rigid. There is room for expression within the structure, a balance between form and freedom. You watch. The dancers move in time with the music, their movements reflecting both skill and feeling. It is not performance in the formal sense, but it carries its own quiet elegance. You glance around the room. Each table holds its own small world. Conversations, gestures, glances, all unfolding independently, yet connected by the shared environment. No one seems entirely alone, even those who sit by themselves. You feel the atmosphere settle around you, the dim light, the steady music, the quiet presence of others. It creates a sense of enclosure that feels both protective and open, a place where the outside world is acknowledged but held at a distance. You remain there for a while. Time moves though. You don't track it closely. The music continues, the conversations shift, the room fills and empties in small, almost imperceptible ways. Eventually you stand. The transition back to the street is gentle but noticeable. The door opens and the cooler air returns along with the broader sound of the city. The music fades behind you, replaced by the familiar rhythm of movement and light. You step onto the sidewalk. Night has begun to settle more fully now. The streetlights glow softly, their light no longer dimmed in the same way as earlier, but still shaped by caution. The city remains active, its energy redirected rather than reduced. You take a breath. The experience inside the club lingers, a quiet echo of music and warmth that follows you as you begin to walk again. And as you move forward into the night, you understand something subtle. Even in a time marked by uncertainty, the city finds ways to create spaces where life feels momentarily complete. Not separate from reality, but gently reshaped. You step back into the night air, carrying the faint echo of music with you, as it dissolves into the broader rhythm of the street. The glow of the club fades behind you, replaced by a softer, more scattered pattern of light. Street lamps cast steady circles onto the pavement. Windows flicker with activity. The city does not quiet. It simply rearranges itself again. You walk on. The sidewalks are still active, though the movement feels less hurried now. Conversations stretch longer. Footsteps slow slightly. People are no longer racing toward obligations. They are settling into the later hours where time feels more flexible. You begin to notice the children. At first, just a few walking beside adults, their smaller steps matching a larger rhythm. Then more of them appear. Groups clustered near building entrances, sitting on stoops, leaning against railings, their voices rising and falling in bursts of energy that contrast gently with the calmer tone of the adults around them. A firmly grounded historical understanding is that children in wartime America were actively involved in everyday efforts, participating in scrap drives, ration awareness, and civil defence activities, while still maintaining their own forms of play. You can see both sides of that reality here. A group gathers near the curb, their attention focused on a game that seems to change its rules as often as it continues. One child holds a small collection of metal pieces, proudly displaying them to the others. Another suggests something, and the group shifts, adapting without pause. Their laughter carries easily through the night air. It is not loud in a disruptive way, but it is clear, distinct, impossible to ignore. It cuts gently through the layered sounds of the city, reminding you that even here, even now, there is space for something light. You slow your pace. A girl sits on the steps of a building, a small booklet in her hands. She flips through it with careful attention, her expression serious. It looks like a collection of ration stamps, or perhaps a booklet related to school activities connected to the war effort. A lesser known detail is that many schools encourage children to participate in organised efforts such as collecting materials or promoting conservation, turning civic responsibility into something that could be understood at a younger age. You can imagine this booklet being part of that system. You move a little closer, then continue on. A boy runs past you, his footsteps quick and uneven, followed closely by another who calls out in playful protest. Their movement disrupts the steady rhythm of the sidewalk for just a moment, then blends back into it as they disappear down the block. You notice how the adults respond. Some watch with quiet amusement. Others remain focused on their own conversations. No one seems surprised. The presence of children is simply part of the environment woven into the larger pattern of life. You pass a small storefront that remains open, its interior softly lit. Inside, a few children stand near the counter, examining items with curiosity. A shopkeeper speaks to them patiently, his tone calm, guiding them through choices that are likely shaped by limited options. The interaction feels gentle, almost instructional. You continue walking. A fire hydrant sits near the corner, and a small group of children has gathered around it, their voices rising as they invent a new game from the simplest of objects. Their movements are imaginative, unconcerned with precision or outcome. You pause for a moment watching. There is something about the way they occupy the space that feels different from the adults. Less constrained, more open. Even within the boundaries of wartime life, they find ways to create their own rhythm. Ongoing scholarly conversations often explore how children interpreted and internalized the realities of war, suggesting that their understanding was shaped as much by play and community as by direct information. As you observe them, it seems likely that both elements are present here. You move on. The street shifts again, revealing a small school building set back slightly from the road. Its windows are dark now, but you can imagine the activity that fills it during the day. Lessons that extend beyond reading and writing. Instructions that prepare students not just for academic success, but for participation in a world shaped by conflict. A notice board stands near the entrance. You step closer and read the posted information. Announcements about collections drills, community efforts. The language is clear, direct, designed to inform without overwhelming. You step back. The building stands quietly, holding within it the structure that supports these young lives as they navigate a changing world. You continue along the sidewalk. The children remain present, though their numbers begin to thin as the hour grows later. Some are called inside by voices from open windows. Others linger a little longer, stretching the boundaries of the evening just enough to feel the freedom of it. You hear one such call now, a name spoken with gentle insistence, a response that carries a mix of reluctance and acceptance. The child pauses, looks back at the group, then turns and heads toward the building. The moment is small but familiar. You take a breath. The air has cooled further, the night settling more fully into place. The sounds of the city remain, but they feel more spaced now, less concentrated. You walk on. The presence of the children fades gradually behind you, replaced once again by the broader movement of the city. Yet something of their energy lingers, a lightness that contrasts with the weight you have felt in other parts of the day. And as you continue forward, you begin to understand something quiet. Even in a time shaped by uncertainty and responsibility, there are still moments where life unfolds in its simplest form, through laughter, through play, through the small, steady continuation of being young in a world that asks for so much. You move beyond the last of the children's laughter, letting the softer echoes of their games fade into the layered hum of the evening. The street begins to shift once more, not in pace this time, but in voice. The sounds around you carry different tones, different cadences, shaped by languages that overlap and intertwine. You notice it first in a shop window. The lettering is unfamiliar at a glance, though the meaning becomes clear as you look longer. Bread, cheese, imported goods, though perhaps not as available now as they once were. The display is modest but carefully arranged, holding onto a sense of identity that extends beyond the immediate moment. You step closer. Inside, two people speak in a language that flows differently from the English you have been hearing. Their voices rise and fall with a rhythm that feels both expressive and contained. Even without understanding the words, you sense the familiarity between them, the ease of shared speech. A widely accepted historical perspective notes that New York in the 1940s was home to large immigrant communities, each maintaining aspects of their cultural identity while adapting to life in the United States. Walking through this part of the city, that reality becomes tangible. You continue along the sidewalk. The storefronts change subtly from one block to the next. A bakery with signs in Italian, a tailor shop with lettering that suggests Eastern European origins, a small grocery where conversations shift fluidly between languages, each one carrying its own history. You pause outside the bakery. The warm scent of bread drifts through the open door, familiar yet distinct. Inside, a woman speaks to the baker, her hands moving as she explains something, her gestures expressive, almost musical. The baker nods, responding in the same language, their exchange quick but clear. A lesser-known detail is that many immigrant neighbourhoods maintain strong ties to their countries of origin through food language and community networks, even during wartime, when travel and communication were limited. These connections offered continuity, a way to hold on to something stable. You step back. The street feels fuller now, not in number, but in texture. Each voice adds a layer. Each language carries a different rhythm, yet they coexist without conflict, blending into the larger sound of the city. You walk on. A group stands near a corner, their conversation animated, shifting between languages with ease. One phrase in English, another in something else, then back again. The transitions are smooth, natural, reflecting a kind of adaptability that feels essential here. You pass a small cafe. Inside, the atmosphere is calm, the lighting soft. A few tables are occupied, each one holding its own quiet world. At one, an older man reads a newspaper in a language that matches the signs outside. At another, two younger people speak in English, their conversation punctuated by occasional words borrowed from another tongue. You do not enter, but you carry the scene with you. You begin to notice how identity is expressed in small ways. In the way a shop is arranged, in the foods displayed, in the language spoken between familiar faces. These elements remain present even as the broader city continues to shape itself around them. Ongoing research often examines how immigrant communities balanced assimilation with cultural preservation during wartime, suggesting that the pressure to conform coexisted with a strong desire to maintain distinct traditions. As you move through these streets, that balance feels visible in every detail. You reach a narrow side street and turn. Here the pace slows slightly. The buildings are closer together, their facades worn but maintained. Laundry hangs between windows, swaying gently in the night air. The scene feels more intimate, less exposed. A woman stands in a doorway, speaking to someone inside. Her voice carries a tone of familiarity shaped by years of shared experience. She pauses, listens, then responds, her expression softening. The conversation feels rooted, grounded in something deeper than the moment itself. You continue. A small group of men sits outside a shop, their chairs angled toward the street. They speak quietly, their discussion measured, reflective. Occasionally one of them gestures toward the passing crowd, as if connecting what they see to what they know. You pass without interruption. The street opens again, returning you to a broader avenue where the flow of people increases once more. The languages blend back into a more uniform sound, though traces remain carried in accents, in phrases, in the subtle variations of speech. You take a breath. The air feels layered, shaped not just by the physical environment, but by the histories carried within it. Each person you pass holds a story that extends beyond this place, even as they move through it with familiarity. You walk on. A shop window catches your attention, its display combining elements from different traditions. It is not entirely one thing or another, but something in between. A reflection of adaptation, of blending, of creating something new from what already exists. You pause briefly, then continue. The city stretches ahead its streets, filled with voices that shift and overlap, each one contributing to a larger whole that is constantly evolving. And as you move through it, you begin to understand something subtle. This place is not defined by a single identity. It is shaped by many, each one carried forward, each one finding its place within the steady movement of the city. You continue along the avenue until the noise begins to soften in a different way. Not because the city is slowing, but because the sounds are being absorbed by the walls around you. A large building rises ahead, its entrance wide, its windows glowing with a steady, almost constant light. You step closer. The sign above the door identifies it clearly. A hospital. The atmosphere shifts the moment you enter. The air is cooler, cleaner touch with the faint scent of antiseptic, and something else you cannot quite name. The sounds here are more contained. Footsteps echo lightly across tiled floors. Voices remain low, measured, careful not to carry too far. An established historical observation notes that hospitals in cities like New York faced increased pressure during the war years, treating not only civilian illnesses, but also managing the broader strain placed on healthcare systems. Standing here, you can sense that pressure, though it is expressed quietly rather than dramatically. You move down a long corridor. The lighting is steady, neither bright nor dim, designed to keep everything visible without creating discomfort. Doors line both sides, some open, some closed. Through one, you glimpse a patient resting their form still beneath a neatly arranged blanket. Through another, a nurse adjusts a tray with precise movements. You slow your pace. A nurse passes you her steps, quick but controlled, her expression focused. She carries a small stack of papers, her attention fixed on the task ahead. There is no hesitation in her movement. Each action is part of a larger sequence that must be completed. You continue. At the end of the corridor, a small waiting area opens into view. Several people sit there, their posture still, their attention directed inward rather than outward. A man leans forward, his hands clasped, his gaze fixed on the floor. A woman sits beside him, her shoulders slightly drawn, in her breathing slow and deliberate. You do not intrude. Instead, you take in the quiet tension that fills the space, a tension that is not expressed through sound, but through stillness. A lesser known detail from this period is that hospital staff often worked extended hours due to staffing shortages, leading to routines that required both physical endurance and emotional resilience. You can see that in the way the nurses move, in the steadiness of their gestures, in the absence of unnecessary motion. You walk further down the corridor. A door opens and a doctor steps out, speaking quietly to someone just beyond your view. His tone is calm, his words measured. The conversation is brief, but it carries weight, each phrase chosen with care. You pass by. The building feels like a world apart from the street, yet deeply connected to it. Every person here has arrived from somewhere else, carrying with them the circumstances that led them through these doors. Ongoing academic discussions consider how wartime conditions influenced medical practices and patient care, suggesting that necessity often accelerated innovation, while also placing significant strain on resources. As you move through the space, that balance feels present in subtle ways. You enter another hallway. This one is quieter. The doors mostly closed. A soft hum of equipment can be heard behind one of them, steady and continuous. You pause briefly, listening, then continue. A nurse stands near a small station reviewing notes with careful attention. She turns a page, makes a small adjustment, then moves on to the next. Her actions are precise, her focus unwavering. You notice how little is wasted here. No unnecessary movement, no excess conversation. Everything serves a purpose, contributing to the larger effort of care. You move toward a window at the end of the corridor. Outside, the city continues as it always does. Lights, movement, the distant flow of traffic. The contrast is striking, though not jarring. The hospital does not isolate itself from the city. It exists within it, responding to it, supporting it. You stand there for a moment. The glass is cool beneath your hand. The view beyond it feels both familiar and distant, as if you are observing the city from a slightly different perspective. You turn back. A stretcher moves quietly down the hall, guided by two attendants whose steps are coordinated and steady. Their expressions are focused, their movements practiced. They pass you without pause, continuing toward a destination you cannot see. You step aside, allowing them space. The moment is brief, but it leaves an impression. You continue walking. The corridor leads you back toward the entrance, the sounds gradually shifting as you approach. Voices become slightly more frequent. Footsteps overlap. The outside world begins to reassert itself. You reach the door and step out. The night air greets you again, carrying the familiar mix of city scents and sounds. The transition is immediate, yet the quiet steadiness of the hospital lingers in your awareness. You take a breath. The city feels the same, yet your perception of it has deepened. Beneath the movement, beneath the light, there are spaces where life is held carefully, where effort is constant, where resilience takes a quieter form. You begin to walk again. The rhythm of the street returns, but it carries with it the memory of what you have just seen. And as you move forward, you understand something subtle. Not all strength is visible. Some of it exists in quiet corridors, in steady hands, in moments that pass without recognition yet shape everything around them. You step away from the hospital, the quiet discipline of its corridors still lingering in your thoughts as the street gathers around you again. The night has settled more fully now. The air carries a slight chill, and the light from windows and street lamps feels more defined against the dark. You walk on. The avenue narrows slightly, and with it the atmosphere shifts. The storefronts here are less formal, their signs smaller, sometimes unlit, sometimes glowing faintly, as if unsure whether to invite attention or avoid it. The movement of people becomes more selective. Fewer families, fewer children, more individuals moving alone or in small, deliberate groups. You begin to notice the difference. A door opens briefly, releasing a burst of laughter that feels sharper than the gentle sounds you have heard elsewhere. It fades quickly as the door closes, leaving behind only the echo of its presence. You continue. A bar stands on the corner. Its windows darkened, its interior visible only in fragments when someone enters or leaves. You catch glimpses of figures seated close together, their movements relaxed but watchful. A man leans against the wall outside, his posture casual, his gaze scanning the street with quiet awareness. A broadly accepted historical understanding is that despite wartime restrictions, nightlife in cities like New York continue to include informal and sometimes unregulated activities existing alongside more visible and sanctioned forms of entertainment. This part of the city reflects that balance, though it does not announce itself openly. You walk past the entrance. The air here feels denser, layered with the scent of tobacco and something faintly sweet. Conversations occur in low tones, their content difficult to discern, their intention more apparent than their words. A small but intriguing observation is that certain establishments operated in ways that blurred the line between legal and informal activity, adapting to changing regulations while maintaining a steady presence within the city's nighttime economy. You can sense the adaptability here in the way people move, in the way spaces are used. You turn down a side street. The lighting is dimmer, the shadows deeper. A single lamp casts a narrow pool of light onto the pavement, leaving the edges of the street in soft obscurity. A figure stands just beyond the light, partially visible, their posture still, their presence deliberate. You do not approach. Instead, you continue walking, allowing the scene to remain at a distance. There is an understanding here that not everything needs to be examined closely. A pair of men passes you, their conversation quiet, their expressions unreadable. They move with purpose, though their destination is not immediately clear. Their footsteps fade, quickly absorbed by the street. You return to the main avenue. The contrast is immediate. The light is stronger, the movement more open, yet the awareness of what exists just beyond the edges remains with you. A police officer stands near an intersection, his presence steady, his attention scanning the area without drawing focus to itself. He does not intervene, does not disrupt. He simply observes part of the structure that maintains a certain balance. Some historians have explored how urban authorities managed vice and informal economies during wartime, weighing enforcement against practicality in a city that depended on continuous activity. As you move through this space, that balance feels evident in subtle ways. You pass another doorway. This time, music drifts out softer than before, less structured. A piano perhaps played without an audience in mind. The notes are uneven, yet expressive, filling the small space with a sense of presence. You pause briefly listening, then you move on. A woman walks ahead of you, her pace measured, her posture composed. She glances briefly over her shoulder, then continues, her attention returning to the path ahead. The gesture is small, but it carries a sense of awareness that feels specific to this part of the city. You follow at a respectful distance. The street opens again, and the atmosphere shifts once more, blending back into the broader rhythm you have come to recognize. Shops' lights, voices all returning to a more familiar pattern. You take a breath. The air feels lighter here, though the memory of the narrow streets remains. The city contains all of it. The visible and the hidden, the structured and the informal existing side by side. You walk on. A late-night cafe appears ahead, its interior calm, its windows clear. A few people sit inside, their presence quiet, their conversations subdued. It feels like a return to something steadier, something more contained. You do not enter. Instead, you continue along the sidewalk, allowing the night to unfold around you in its layered complexity. And as you move forward, you begin to understand something subtle. The city does not separate its worlds. They exist together, sometimes in plain sight, sometimes just beyond it, but always part of the same continuous motion. You leave the narrower streets behind and follow a stairwell tucked between two buildings, its iron railing cool beneath your hand. The steps lead upward, this time away from the street, away from the steady current of movement below. Each step softens the sound of the city, not removing it, but stretching it into something more distant, more diffuse. You reach the top. A rooftop opens around you, wide and unexpected, edged by low brick walls and scattered with small objects that suggest quiet, repeated use. Chairs that do not quite match, a folded blanket, a metal bucket placed near the corner. The surface beneath your feet is flat, but worn, marked by time and weather. The air feels different here, cooler, cleaner in a subtle way. The scent of the street is still present, but lighter, carried upward and spread thin. You take a breath and hold it for a moment, letting the sensation settle. A widely recognised historical point is that many New Yorkers used rooftops and fire escapes during warmer months as places to gather rest and escape the heat of crowded apartments. Standing here, you understand why. The space feels open in a way the streets do not. You move toward the edge. From here, the city stretches outward in every direction. Windows glow softly, some bright, some dimmed. The outlines of buildings form a layered horizon, their shapes overlapping in a pattern that feels both structured and organic. You lean lightly against the wall. Below, the sounds continue. Traffic moves in steady lines. Voices rise and fall. Somewhere a radio plays faintly, its melody drifting upward, broken occasionally by distance. But here, everything feels slower. You notice you are not alone. A few figures occupy the rooftop, each one settled into their own quiet moment. A man sits in a chair, his posture relaxed, his gaze directed outward, as if following something beyond the visible skyline. A woman stands near the opposite edge, her arms folded loosely, her attention fixed on the lights below. No one speaks. There is an unspoken agreement that this space allows for silence. A small but evocative detail from this period is that portable radios became increasingly common, allowing people to bring music and news into spaces like this, transforming rooftops into extensions of indoor life. You hear one now placed near the wall, its volume low, its signal steady. You step closer. The voice from the radio is calm, measured, offering updates that blend into the night rather than interrupt it. The words are not urgent. They are simply present part of the ongoing flow of information that shapes each day. You sit down. The surface beneath you is firm but not uncomfortable. You rest your hands lightly on your knees, feeling the slight texture of the material beneath your fingers. You look up. The sky is visible here in a way it was not from the street. Not entirely clear, but open enough to reveal a scattering of stars faint against the glow of the city. They appear and disappear as you shift your focus. Their presence subtle but persistent. You let your gaze drift between sky and skyline. The contrast is quiet but meaningful. Above something vast and distant. Below something dense and immediate. Both existing at once, both shaping the experience of this moment. Some researchers have considered how urban residents sought moments of elevation and perspective during wartime, using physical spaces like rooftops to create a sense of distance from daily pressures. As you sit here, that idea feels tangible. You close your eyes for a moment, The sounds below continue softened by distance. A car passes. A voice calls out. A door closes somewhere far beneath you. Each sound arrives slightly delayed, slightly reduced, creating a rhythm that feels almost gentle. You open your eyes again. The figures around you remain still, each one holding their own space without interruption. There is a quiet respect here, a shared understanding that this moment does not need to be filled. You notice the slight movement of laundry hanging on a nearby line, its fabric shifting gently in the night air. It adds a small motion to the stillness, a reminder that even in rest, the city continues to move in subtle ways. You stand slowly. The rooftop feels different now. Not just a place above the city, but a part of it that exists on its own terms. A place where the pace can shift without breaking the connection to everything below. You walk toward the stairwell. Before you descend, you pause once more, looking out over the lights. The patterns they form, the way they stretch into the distance, the way they suggest lives unfolding in countless directions at once. You take a breath. Then you step down. The sounds of the city grow stronger with each step, the distance closing, the rhythm returning to its fuller form. By the time you reach the bottom, the street has reclaimed its presence entirely. You step out. The night continues unchanged in its motion, yet your experience of it has shifted slightly. The pause above has left a trace, a softness that remains even as you rejoin the flow. And as you walk on, you carry with you a quiet awareness that even in a city that never truly rests, there are places where time slows, where sound softens, where the vast and the immediate meet if only for a moment. You return fully to the street, the hush of the rooftop dissolving into the deeper pulse of the city at night. The hour has shifted again. It is no longer evening in the social sense, nor quite late enough for silence. It is something in between, a time when certain kinds of work begin rather than end. You notice it in the movement. The crowds have thinned, but the activity has not. Instead, it has changed character. Fewer conversations, more purpose. People walk with quieter steps, their focus directed toward tasks that must be completed before morning arrives. You follow that current. A delivery cart rolls past you, its wooden frame rattling softly as it moves over the uneven pavement. The driver leans slightly forward, guiding it with steady hands, his attention fixed on the path ahead. The load is covered, its contents hidden, but its destination feels immediate. A well-documented feature of New York life is that much of the city's essential labour has always taken place outside the most visible hours, ensuring that goods, services and infrastructure are ready for the day ahead. Here, in this quieter stretch of night, that system reveals itself more clearly. You continue walking. A bakery door stands open, releasing a steady glow of light onto the sidewalk. Inside, figures move with practiced coordination. Flour dust lingers in the air, catching the light as it drifts slowly downward. The scent is warm, familiar, grounding. You step closer just enough to observe. One worker shapes dough with careful hands, each movement consistent, precise. Another checks trays in a large oven, adjusting their position with a long-handled tool. There is little conversation. The work speaks for itself, guided by routine and repetition. A small but engaging detail from this period is that many bakeries operated through the night to ensure fresh bread was available each morning, aligning their schedules with the city's daily rhythm rather than the clock alone. You can feel that alignment here, the sense that this work is part of something larger. You move on. Further down the street, a man sweeps the sidewalk in front of a closed shop. The sound of the broom against the pavement is steady, almost rhythmic. Each pass clears a small space, preparing it for the next day's activity. He pauses briefly, leaning on the handle, then resumes. You pass without interruption. A truck idles nearby, its engine low and constant. Two men unload crates from the back, their movements efficient, their communication minimal. Each crate is lifted, carried, placed in a specific position. The process repeats without variation. You watch for a moment. There is a quiet satisfaction in the repetition, in the way each action leads naturally to the next. Some historians have examined how these nighttime economies functioned as the unseen foundation of urban life, suggesting that their reliability was as crucial as any visible institution. As you observe the work unfolding around you, that idea feels grounded in reality. You continue along the sidewalk. A newspaper printing facility comes into view, its windows bright despite the hour. Inside, machines operate with steady intensity, their motion continuous, their output precise. Stacks of freshly printed papers are gathered, sorted, prepared for distribution. You pause near the entrance. The sound is different from anything you have heard so far. A layered mechanical rhythm, complex yet controlled. It fills the space without overwhelming it, a testament to the coordination required to produce something that will soon be in countless hands. You imagine the journey ahead for those papers, from this building to the newsstands you passed earlier, from the presses to the readers, each step part of a chain that connects the night to the morning. You move on. The street remains active in its own quiet way. A janitor unlocks a door and disappears inside. A man adjusts the display in a shop window, preparing it for the next day's customers. A small group gathers briefly at a corner, exchanging a few words before dispersing again. You take a breath. The air feels cooler now. The night settling deeper, though never fully still. The city continues to function, its systems moving forward without pause. You pass a market where workers arrange produce under soft light, their hands moving quickly but carefully. Each item is placed with intention, creating a display that will greet the morning with order and clarity. You notice how few people stop to observe. This work is not meant to be seen in the same way as the daytime bustle. It exists in the background, essential yet often unnoticed. You continue walking. The streets stretch ahead, quieter, but not empty, each block holding its own version of this steady activity. The city prepares itself layer by layer for the cycle to begin again. You feel a subtle shift within yourself, a growing awareness of the continuity that defines this place. The way one phase of the day flows into another without interruption. The way the visible and the unseen support each other in quiet balance. You reach a corner and pause. The light from a nearby lamp casts a soft circle onto the pavement, illuminating the small details you might otherwise miss. The texture of the ground, the faint marks left by passing wheels, the subtle movement of air. You look around. The city is still here, still moving, still alive in ways that do not always draw attention. And as you step forward again, you understand something quiet but essential. The night does not pause the city. It reveals another part of it. One that works without audience. One that prepares without recognition. One that keeps everything ready for what comes next. You continue along this quiet street, the steady labour of the night still unfolding behind you as the sky begins to shift, almost imperceptibly. It is not yet morning, but something in the air has changed. The darkness feels lighter at its edges, as if the city itself is beginning to exhale. You slow your pace. The streets are more open now, the movement more spaced, yet the sense of continuity remains. A few figures still pass by their steps, measured their tasks nearly complete. The work of the night is giving way to the first signs of a new day. You follow the gentle incline of the avenue. Ahead, the outline of a bridge emerges, its structure faint against the gradually brightening sky. You move toward it, drawn by the quiet promise of open space beyond the close geometry of the streets. As you reach the base, you pause. The river below reflects the dim light, its surface calm, broken only by small ripples that catch and release the glow. The city rises behind you, its buildings still lit in places, their windows holding the final moments of night. A well-grounded historical observation is that despite wartime restrictions and uncertainties, New York maintained its continuous rhythm, adapting its routines while preserving its essential character as a city that rarely rested. Standing here, you can feel that persistence in every detail. You step onto the bridge. The air feels cooler here, moving more freely across the open space. You take a breath, letting it fill your lungs, carrying with it a sense of clarity that was less present in the narrower streets. You walk slowly. Each step carries you further from the dense layers of the city, though it remains close visible in every direction. The skyline stretches behind you, its familiar shapes softened by the early light. A small but evocative detail is that many people during this time sought out moments like this at the edges of the city where the view allowed for a broader perspective, even if only for a short while. It is not escape. It is pause. You reach the midpoint and stop. The sky has begun to change more noticeably now. The deep tones of night give way to softer shades, a gradual unfolding that feels almost gentle. The first hint of sunlight touches the edges of the buildings, catching on windows and turning them briefly into points of quiet brightness. You rest your hands on the railing. The metal is cool smooth beneath your fingers. You look out over the water, then back toward the city, letting your gaze move slowly between the two. A continuing line of inquiry among historians considers how urban resilience during wartime was sustained not just through large-scale systems, but through the daily persistence of ordinary routines. As you stand here, that idea feels fully realised. You think back, the dimmed lights of evening, the crowded stairwells, the steady movement of the subway, the quiet focus of the newsstand, the warmth of the diner, the rhythm of the docks, the voices of Harlem, the careful choices in the shops, the letters carried with hope and uncertainty, the presence of uniforms, the escape of the cinema, the softness of the music, the laughter of children, the layered voices of immigrant streets, the quiet strength of the hospital, the hidden corners of the night, the stillness of the rooftop, the unseen labour that carried the city through the dark hours, each moment connected, each one part of a larger whole. You take a breath. The light continues to grow. The city begins to stir again in a different way. A window opens. A figure appears on a distant street. The first sounds of morning begin to rise faint at first, then gradually more defined. You feel the shift. Not abrupt, not dramatic, but steady. The night does not end. It transitions. You stand there for a moment longer. Then you turn. You begin to walk back toward the city, toward the streets that are already preparing to fill once more. The rhythm you have followed through the night continues unchanged in its essence, though always adapting in its form. And as you move forward, the pace of your steps slows slightly. Your breathing deepens. The edges of your awareness soften. You no longer feel the need to follow every detail, to observe every movement. The city remains steady and continuous, but your place within it becomes quieter, more at ease. You walk. The sounds blend together. The light grows. The details become gentler, less defined. You pass through the streets without effort now, carried by a rhythm that no longer asks for attention-only presence. The buildings rise around you, familiar and distant at the same time. The air moves softly. The city continues. And you let it. You let the motion carry on without needing to follow it. You let the sounds settle into something softer. You let the light become something calm and steady. There is nothing more you need to do. Nothing more you need to see. The city will continue. It always does. You simply rest within it now, allowing the final moments of this journey to fade gently into stillness. Your steps slow, your breath softens. The rhythm of the city becomes a quiet background, steady and reassuring. And as the first full light of day begins to settle across the buildings and streets, you feel yourself drifting into a calm carried by the continuity you have witnessed. Everything continues, everything holds, everything moves forward, and you can rest. Sweet dreams.